Welcome to Bedtime Stories. Home Sweet Home. Once upon a time a countryside mouse lived in a hole under the root of a big old oak tree. He loved the sound of squirrels chattering during the day and crickets chirping at night. He loved the smell of rich dirt and hardy grass all around him. He had a cousin who lived in the city side. One day the country mouse invited his city cousin for a visit. Before the city mouse could arrive, he tidied and cleaned up his hole. He straightened his oak leaf bed. He spread fresh pine needles on the floor. He scrubbed the tuna can table and polished the bottle cap plates. Then the countryside mouse sat by the entrance of his hole, gazed out at the stars, and waited for his cousin from city side to arrive. When the city side mouse arrived, he set his fine leather suitcase on the pine needles. "I see, cousin, so this is your cellar?" he asked the countryside mouse. "No," said the countryside mouse, "it's my home. You see, home sweet home." He showed his cousin the back of the hole, where he stored his grain. He led him up onto the knob of old oak root, where he sometimes sat to watch the sunset. Then he made him sit down at the tuna can table and served him a dinner of barleycorn and wheat germ. The city-side mouse nibbled his meal politely. "This certainly tastes as though it's not good for me." He coughed and swallowed. "A bit dry, perhaps. Could I bother you for a cup of tea?" The countryside mouse brewed up a thimble of dandelion tea for them both. "Here's to my city-side cousin. Thanks for visiting," they both toasted. When the thimbles were empty, the countryside mouse changed into his long bathroom robe, the city-side mouse changed into his silk pajamas, and the mice settled into their oak leaves for the night. After his city-side cousin rustled around in his oak leaves for a while, he finally drifted off to sleep. The countryside mouse awoke early the next morning, as usual. A robin family twittered in the old oak tree. A rooster crowed at a nearby farm. But the city-side mouse squeezed his pillow over his ears. "Oh, dear, what is that confounded racket?" he mumbled. "That's the sound of morning in the country," said the countryside mouse. "It's the wonderful music that makes me want to start the new day." City Mouse pulled the pillow from his face and opened one eye. "You start your day in the morning?" he asked. "Here in the country we rise at dawn, and sleep at dusk," the countryside mouse said, buttoning his overalls. He pulled on his sturdy work boots and pushed his wheelbarrow out into the morning sun. The city-side mouse rolled to the edge of his oak leaf bed. He wiped the sleep from his eyes. He slid his feet into his shiny black dress shoes and followed his cousin outside. The countryside mouse gathered acorns and stacked them near his hole. Then he shucked the seeds from the tall rye grass and carried them into the hole. Then he went to the cornfield to find fallen corn. City-side mouse stayed back and watched him at work. While the countryside mouse was hard at work, the city-side mouse yawned and leaned against the root of the old oak tree. Then he wiped the dust from his shoes with his silk handkerchief. When the countryside mouse returned with some corn, he piled it neatly. "Thank goodness you're done." The city-side mouse collapsed into the wheelbarrow. "Now I'd say it's time for a snack and a nap." He giggled. "The work isn't finished. We still have lots to do before we can rest." The city-side mouse sighed. "I'm simply not cut out for the country life," he said. "A mouse could starve to death here, working so hard for his survival. Come home with me for a while to the city side. I'll show you the good life, and the goodness in life." The city-side mouse packed his silk pajamas into his fine leather suitcase. And the countryside mouse packed his long bathroom robe into his carpet-rugged bag. The two mice set out for city-side cousin's home in the city. The countryside mouse followed the city-side mouse over fields and valleys, into dark, noisy subway tunnels, and through crowded city streets until they reached the luxury hotel where the city-side mouse had a hideout. The cityside mouse stopped in front of the door. Polished marble floors and shiny brass knobs, he said. Now, this is how mice like us are supposed to live. The countryside mouse stared up at the revolving glass door. How do we get inside, cityside bro? Wait till the opening comes around, then run through, the cityside mouse replied. The door swung around, and the cityside cousin disappeared right inside. It took a few more spins before the countryside mouse gave it a try. He whirled around and around in the revolving door until the cityside mouse tugged his carpet-rugged bag and dragged him inside. He followed his cityside cousin across the lobby and through a small crack in the wall hidden by velvet draperies. My apartment, like you always said, home sweet home, the cityside mouse said when they entered inside. The countryside mouse looked around in amazement. His home was filled with gold candlesticks, crystal goblets, and linen napkins. We're under the bandstand. The cityside mouse pointed out the hole that was his front door. An orchestra plays there every night, and ladies and gentlemen dance every night from dusk until dawn. How can you sleep with all these noise? Asked the countryside mouse. Sleep, said the cousin. I can sleep during the day. We do things a little differently here. We sleep from dawn to dusk and hang out from dusk to dawn. Dinner, for example, was different in the city than in the country. At a 5-star hotel, dinner begins with appetizers, the cityside mouse explained. The city mouse led the country mouse through the dining room. They hid behind potted plants and raced under tablecloths. They waited until the chef went to check something in the dining room, then they scampered across the kitchen and into the dark pantry where the countryside mouse stumbled over something. Do be careful, said the cityside mouse. The countryside mouse saw what he'd stumbled over. It's a mousetrap. The cityside mouse scooted it under a shelf with his paw. You'll learn to stay away from them pretty soon. The cityside mouse gobbled fancy crackers, nibbled pasta, and even managed to chew a hole in a tin of smoked salmon. Now this is what I call a treat, said the cityside mouse, patting his tummy. It's mine fine dining. But the countryside mouse was still so frightened that he barely ate a crumb. Tonight the chef is preparing roasted duck with herbed potatoes in a delicate cream sauce. His mouth watered. His whiskers twitched. Once you taste and you'll never go back to the country. The mice crept out of the pantry. The kitchen seemed empty. The cityside mouse darted about, gathering up bits of duckling and potatoes. He didn't notice the chef marching back into the kitchen. But the chef noticed him. You again, this time I will kill you, shouted the chef. The chef chased the mice around the kitchen with a broom. The city mouse and the country mouse both escaped through a hole under the sink. No main course tonight, I'm afraid, said the cityside mouse. But don't worry, cousin brother. We'll make it up for you with some dessert. The cityside mouse showed him the tarts and turnovers and leftover cheesecakes. The countryside mouse timidly nibbled the edge of a flaky cream puff. It was so very delicious. He leaned forward to get a bigger bite, and splat. The cart lurched forward. He had landed face down in the cream puff. The cityside mouse grabbed the edge of a lacy napkin and hung on tight as a waiter wheeled the cart across the dining room. The countryside mouse wobbled off the cart. I'm not cut out for life in the city, he said. You take too many risks for your dinner and survival. A mouse could starve to death here. I'm going home to the good life without any of goodness in life. So the country mouse dragged his carpet-rugged bag back through crowded city streets, over fields and valleys until he reached his hole under the root of the big old oak tree. He ate a late supper of acorns and wheat kernels, then curled up in his oak leaf bed. He could hear the crickets chirping. Back at his hotel, the cityside mouse curled up in his linen napkin and listened to the orchestra play. Both mice sighed in their home. I love being home, after all, home sweet home, they said, and lived happily ever after in their own sweet home without comparing and complaining. If you like the story, please do like, share and subscribe. Thank you for listening. Good night.